Life is a battle, and I generally only pick the fights I can win.
The Mosley name is in trouble again.
They sent a video to the FIA. I'd done no harm to them. I was just working quietly away on road safety, motorsport safety.
This is a man who has called the shots in world motorsport for decades, and during that time he's made one or two enemies.
I got calls every day saying, gotta go, he's gotta go.
I had battles before and more since, but this was different because this was the gutter press trying to destroy all the work that we'd done.
That's moments where you need your friends.
People you thought you could count on, you couldn't. There were some people going around the paddock saying I ought to resign.
They obviously didn't know who they were taking on.
They think if they attack hard enough, I may go away, but actually, for me, it's exactly the opposite. Probably a defect of character. But I don't like being pushed. These days I'm fighting for road safety, especially in India, where some of the cars are death traps.
Every year, 140,000 people are dying on the Indian roads.
When a commercial plane crashes, you have 300, 400 people who die.
You have the same amount of people dying every day on the roads.
2.6 million people get seriously injured every year. It's a crisis.
Our goal is to get more five-star cars in India, but first we've got to get one.
There are very few names in the global automotive scene that are more well recognized. I'm speaking, of course, about the former president of the global NCAP, Max Mosley.
Thank you very much. For the first time ever, we're going to have a safer choice designation to any car built in India, which can reach the five-star standard. Absolutely, ready when you are. While we were here for 3 days in India, more than 1,000 people will die on the roads. I think a huge problem is that people don't see road deaths in the way they see other deaths.
Yes.
A death is a death. Whether it's caused by a war, terrorist, or a road accident, makes no difference to the family. I mean, it's not glamorous like motorsport, where you maybe save one life every year or two. But in India, if you could make 0.1% difference, it's 140 people. So those 140 people walking around out there, because you did it, it really, really matters. I was influenced by my parents, particularly my father. I mean, obviously he's a controversial figure. But everything that he did in his life, he did because he thought it would be for the benefit of other people. My father was Sir Oswald Mosley. After a major career in conventional politics, he started the British Union of Fascists. His family had been quite well off since the 17th, 18th century. And my mother's family was similar.
If you're lucky enough to have a bit of money, it's absolute duty to try and do something useful. My mother's maiden name was Mitford. She was Diana Mitford, one of the well-known Mitford girls. One of my aunts, Unity, became very friendly with Hitler. And then my mother met Hitler, and they all became quite friendly. I think my father only ever met Hitler twice in his life, and they didn't really get on. When my parents got married, my father wanted to get married secretly because there was a lot of sort of violence and trouble in England at that time to do with his politics. So they decided to get married in Germany, and they ended up being married in Goebbels' house with Hitler present as the sort of main guest.
And on balance, would you say that it was better or would have not been better if Hitler had ever existed?
No, certainly better that he should not ever have existed, because his existence led to 25 million Europeans being killed. And if I had my way, those 25 million would be alive today, including 6 million Jews who never would have been killed if there hadn't been a war. They made the greatest mistake they ever made when they produced that war.
And who was most of all?
Max's family heritage is a very tough one for anyone to sort of fully escape from. His father's politics had become, completely unacceptable before and then after the Second World War.
For the first 2 or 3 years of my life, I was looked after by a nanny because my parents were interned under a wartime regulation.
What was the effect of your imprisonment on you? Were you bitter? What?
Well, bitter, did you say?
Yes.
I don't think I was exactly bitter. Prison is extremely disagreeable. Holloway was a very old-fashioned, condemned, I believe, prison.
I used to visit them probably 3 or 4 times a year, and I can remember going to the prison and visiting them. I suppose I assumed that everybody's parents were locked up and they went to see them from time to time. They were released from Holloway Prison in 1943 and bought a house in the English countryside. Eventually they settled in France. We had this tutor who then stopped when I was 11, and I was allowed to just sort of do a bit of hunting, do a bit of shooting, and that was it. I got expelled from the German school, climbing into the girls' part of the school. I think it's fair to say my education was messed up. I met Jean, my wife, when I was 17 and she was 17. We got married at the end of my second year at Oxford. When I went to Oxford, I still got a degree, but I mean, it wasn't a good one.
So I came up to Oxford in '58 at the same time as Max, and we both came up to read physics, and he went on to read law. Max is seriously bright. At that time in life, Max was still under the shadow of his father, and his father was still trying to get into Parliament.
The 500 police had their hands full in Trafalgar Square.
Typically, the East Londoners would come and attack his father, and Max would, of course, protect his father.
They crowd down with Mosley, and down he went. Sir Oswald's son Max was among those later arrested.
Everybody who'd been arrested had to pitch up in court the next day. And the man who arrested me was a superintendent. Of course, he gave evidence. And when I came to cross-examine him, I said, "Your father, age 65, he's an old-age pensioner. He's attacked by a group of people. Are you saying I should just stand there and say, well, that's all right. I'm not going to do anything?" And of course, quite difficult to answer that. He said, "But Mr. Mosley, you knew when you came to this meeting that there was going to be trouble." I said, "Actually not. Neither did you. Because had you known, you'd have had a few more police on the spot to prevent it." That was it, no more questions, and I was duly acquitted. In 1963, I realized that what my father was doing wouldn't go anywhere. I disagreed in aspects in his politics, but fundamentally I lost interest. I sort of wanted to be my own person, and it always irritated me that I used to get son of, son of, son of. You know, I mean, you can't help who your father is. Nothing against him, I mean, that's not a criticism. It's just that I always liked to be in a world where I could sort of get on and do something. So I joined the Territorial Army Parachute Regiment. That was against his wishes. It's like a part-time army, and I didn't have any money. I used to teach in the evenings, law of various kinds. My wife was working, and somebody she was working for gave her 2 tickets for the Empire Trophy, as it was then called. And I remember arriving there, and I could hear this sort of sound. So I wanted to see what was going on. I ran up to the fence, and I got there just in time to see the cars come under what was then the Daily Express bridge. I was transfixed. And I just watched them go by, and I thought, never do anything else, I've got to do that. So I bought a rather simple racing car. And then I suddenly found myself in the collecting area, and I heard somebody say, Mosley, Max Mosley. He must be some relation of Alf Mosley, the coach builder in Leicester. And I thought, oh. It's the first time in my life I'd ever heard he must be some relation of, other than my father. I found a world where the name Mosley meant nothing. That was the beginning of a whole season of great fun with all these famous drivers.
Jim Clark he was the Senna, he was the Hamilton, you know, of that day.
I remember Graham Hill being just in front on the grid, and he was world champion. I mean, you know, I knew that I was completely out of my class. Obviously, I knew it was dangerous. First big race I ever took part in was Formula 2 race in Hockenheim, 1968. At the start of that race, as soon as you went round the first right-hander, we rolled to the forest. It was thick spray, so you didn't know where the road went. So I was watching the tops of the trees, and I backed off. And I thought, this is madness. And on the way out, there was less spray. You could see an ambulance on one side of the road. There were a lot of spectators around in the paddock in those days. Somebody came up and said in German, "Is Jim Clark dead?"
Jim Clark was killed. He wasn't wearing a seatbelt.
Jim Clark, der zweimalige Weltmeister, Grand Prix-Sieger, ist tot.
One of the other drivers in the field, Max Mosley, did have a seatbelt in that car, and that's because he was always interested in the basic science and evidence of safety.
Funnily enough, my mother insisted I fitted full harness seatbelts in. But after that race, my wife and I had a slightly difficult conversation at home where she said, you say that that's safe as long as you're careful. But Jim Clark was obviously careful. He's a better driver than you. And I couldn't really deny that. It was quite obvious she wanted me to stop. Of the, I think, 21, 22 cars on the grid at Hockenheim in April, by July, 3 were dead. 69, the second or third race I ever did it was the Nürburgring. The left front wheel just stopped turning. I ended up in a camping ground.
I think the first time I became aware of Max, from memory, he didn't compete because he felt the circuit was just unsafe. Or he was a pussy.
That was really it. I thought the time has come to stop. Robin Hurd and I had known each other at Oxford because we both did physics. He went on to do engineering, and he got the second highest first they've ever had in the history of Oxford.
And Matt came over and he said, "Look, Robin, come and do Formula 1 with me. We can build our own team. We can take on the world." In the first race, we needed to have the cars built by the end of January. And by this time it was September, so we had 4 months, starting from nothing. So we came across this obscure Oxfordshire market town called Bicester that had a disused dairy available, and we rented it.
There's a big article in the Times about this new racing car company, and the author explained that no one would undertake something like this with less than £500,000. And I felt it wasn't my job to say, actually, we've only got 10,000, we're not going to last very long unless something happens. So I didn't. I wanted to drum up press, so I got a sport journalist, Ian Phillips, to write about March.
There I was, the new boy, very much the office junior, seeing a news story develop in front of my very eyes.
Well, we're very excited. All the indications are that they're going to be fully competitive by the time the South African Grand Prix comes. We decided that we could probably do it.
It was a wheeze, if you like, to conquer the world.
March have shown that when it comes to getting a project off the drawing board and onto the track, they can move faster than anyone else in racing. It remains to be seen whether the cars themselves can do the same.
We pitched up in South Africa. Practice took place with 2 cars for us. That was Amon and Siffert. 2 cars for Tyrrell, that was Stewart and I think Salvo Gavin. And then there was Andretti. And Amon and Stewart recorded identical times, but they were the fastest. I remember like yesterday, it's 1:19.3. By modern standards, we blocked out the front row of the grid. In the first 4 races in 1970, we won 3 of them. One of them, our car lapped the entire field.
We had Ferrari, Lotus, Brabham, BRM, all the World Championship winners. And we just rolled up from this disused dairy in Oxfordshire and stuffed the lot.
Formula One as a whole was furious because, how can a couple of almost undergraduates come along, set up a company, no money, and suddenly blow us all off first race?
I think it's fair to say that what March did turned the motor racing world upside down. And it's almost as if our company is taking the piss out of motorsport, so why don't you all join in?
The sense of satisfaction was enormous because everything we'd set out to do had happened. We'd done it, just. But it was still dangerous. 4 drivers were killed in the next 3 years. And at March, we had our own tragedy. Should I press?
Yeah.
When Roger Williamson was killed in one of our cars at Zandvoort, the tyre was in a fast right-hand corner and the tyre delaminated and crashed and caught fire.
I couldn't believe only David Purley made any attempt to help him. I've never seen the whole thing there, and that's obviously on Dutch TV. But, it's horrific, the whole thing. And the worst thing for me was, I was in the pits, I was with his father, and it was quite evident to me, having watched it, that, first of all, he was in the car, secondly, that he was dead. Nobody would survive that. And then his father said to me, Roger is all right, isn't he? And I had to say, I don't think he is. Awful. And, the thing is, the father doted on him, and he was the sort of, the whole thing. I mean, the death was terrible. The way of dying, beyond terrible. And, of course, Purley could hear him shouting in the car to get him out. But because Purley was on his own, he couldn't do anything. And of course, to me, what's extraordinary is that none of the other drivers stopped. And, when people talk about safety and they drove past that, beyond comprehension. It's just a race. I mean, okay, so you lose a race, but that boy was that old man's whole life. You always had this feeling of there's something horrible about this sport.
There was always this thought, look, we can put this right. There's no reason why motor racing could be so immorally unsafe.
I had my sons, Patrick and Alexander, and at that point I thought to myself, do I really want to be involved in this?
But the amazing thing about Max is he just keeps going. We've had this tremendous success in Europe, around a 50% reduction in occupant fatalities.
That amounts to over 78,000 lives in Europe alone.
Between now and September, we're going to get some extra funding from Bloomberg for a bit more testing, another 4 or 5 cars. Maybe as soon as next week, we'll be suggesting, so if we can repeat the wonderful thing you do with buying the vehicles.
And I saw in the Times of India this morning, they quote Tata as saying that the Nana has either got to be radically upgraded or done away with.
It's all about saving human lives. A star rating for vehicles is so important. We don't even understand how a seatbelt or an airbag is important in vehicles over here.
So now we'll find out whichever models you let us know. We'll immediately send you the prices.
Yeah.
And we'll take it on.
It's perfect.
You get to the stage where you think, I really can't face another of these trips, another of these meetings. And then you think, suppose somebody said to you, if you make the trip, there's somebody alive. If you don't make the trip, that person is going to die, and it's their whole life. When you think of it in those terms, you have to do it. You don't really have a lot of choice, because you're in a position to do it.
In the next 6 months, which cars are you looking at? Which manufacturer?
We can't say. We let them know when the car's in a container, we ring them up and say,
when it's too late to do anything.
I sold my interest in the March team. We'd had a good run, but we'd failed to win a Formula One World Championship. And so it was a fairly natural thing that I could then spend all my time on the affairs of the Formula One constructors, where Bernie obviously was already involved.
Let's get all the cars back into the pits and change tyres. All the cars back into the pits and change the tyres. Come on.
Bernie and Max hit it off straight away. They needed each other.
They couldn't be more different, which makes it a fascinating partnership.
We thought that things wasn't being run too well, and maybe somebody a little more commercial should get involved.
Originally, the organisers were all essentially a branch of the FIA, and their interest was to pay the teams as little as possible. So Bernie and I tried to organise the teams. We called ourselves the Formula One Constructors Association. But it wasn't easy. They got somebody called Pat Duffler, who was actually the Marlboro man.
I was representing the organisers. They wanted somebody to just stand up to Bernie. And I'd been the fool who was willing to go into battle.
We used to call Duffler the laughing boy because in any negotiation, he would always be smiling or laughing. And the worse it got for him, the more he'd smile and laugh. We think it was some sort of nervous tic. But I took the view that we absolutely mustn't negotiate with him because that would give him credibility. As long as we refused to talk to him and said, no, we're talking with the individual organisers, nobody took any notice.
Max was not particularly liked by a lot of the teams. I mean, he had tried racing himself, team management, and he had failed. This is a world that just admires winners.
Well, poor old Duffler, he's got to do the best he can. And a failed driver, I'll admit to. But, I still drive a lot faster than he could.
I think some of them thought of him as a lawyer who had lost his way by being in the motor racing circuit.
Part of the course.
Where's he?
I don't know, but the point is, Max, we can't
do that.
Max, we can't see the flags, we can't see the cars.
We had to win them over, but we had our own agenda. Bernie and I both wanted a race in Brazil, but the team said we don't want to go until we've got the money.
So I bankrolled things. If it went wrong, we were the losers, not the teams.
I said, tell you what, Bernie, I'll go there, I'll get the money. Somebody came in with the money, counted it all out. We're talking sort of $100,000 plus, which in those, I mean, even now it's a lot of money, but then it was a lot of money. Put it all in my briefcase and made to go. It was very primitive.
I think that what Bernie had was the wheeler-dealer attitude. Bernie is fundamentally a gambler.
Canada 75, we couldn't get the Canadian organisers to sign the contract we wanted signed. And Bernie said to them, if it's not signed by midnight, we're not coming. It wasn't signed.
This was a deal that was on the table until whatever the date was, if not, bye-bye.
Bernie was just on the edge of being a little bit coarse. Max was so smooth.
They then made contact with him immediately. Said, it's okay, we will pay the money, because it's all about money, that one. So there was then a meeting of the teams in Graham Hill's motorhome, and they were sort of agreeing to go to the race. And I said, no, you absolutely can't do that. But everybody would say, oh, come on, Max, don't be so, what's the problem? I said, if you've got a hostage situation, and you say, if you don't do this by 11 o'clock, hostage gets killed. I said, the body's got to come out the door at 1 minute past 11, otherwise you lose all credibility.
In the past, they've all left the meeting and said, oh, well, meet again at the next race, or let's have a chat or something. And Max was Max. That's the difference.
The effect of that was that from then on, deadlines were taken really seriously.
But because of all of the conflict between the organizers and Eccleston, there were a lot of people saying, well, maybe there won't be a Grand Prix season next year. The goal was to keep the organizers together.
And each time they all got together, Bernie and I would go out of our way to break it up. It's always very simple, divide and rule. And so we'd do a deal with this organizer or that organizer. We always used to sort of have in our mind a little graveyard with Duffler, Tre, Legazek. I mean, they're all friends. We sort of stayed friendly with all of them, but we did, as we put it, bury them one after another.
Bernie succeeded in undercutting me. He said, I'm the king. I'm going to be running the show my way.
By then, we were effectively running Formula One. And of course, it's always when you think you're now totally in charge that the big problems really come. And of course, they came in the shape of Jean-Marie Balès.
Jean-Marie Balestre became president of FISA, the famous Fédération Internationale du Sport Automobile.
He was bragging he was going to run circles around Eccleston.
It became quite clear that his idea was that he should be running Formula One and not us. And obviously, we didn't agree.
Vous avez occupé la totalité des lieux, vous avez transformé le salon d'époque en discothèque, ça c'est intolérable, c'est fini. Alors maintenant, vous allez rendre les lieux, remettre les lieux en état.
That was the real start of the FISA FOCA war.
One of the things we wanted to do was destabilize him as much as we could, make things difficult for him.
I used to publish a column called Private Ear, which was written by Nick Britton. And one of the last things we did was publish a picture of Balest in Nazi uniform.
There were pictures floating around from Monsieur Balestre in his SS uniform, yes, sir.
That was unfortunate. We didn't really approve. We don't know exactly who organized that.
He was 19 years old, so, you know, It was always held very much against him. I just thought, why worry?
I did find out this was 6 or 7 years later, that had been planted. Given to Nick by one M. Mosley.
It's a great story, but it's just not true. I never actually had one of these pictures, so I couldn't have given it to anybody. The first real conflict was artificial, in that FISA decreed that the drivers should come to a briefing just before the race. So we told the drivers not to go, and most of them didn't. FISA then suspended their licenses. The next race was Spain. Ballet said, no, unless the fine was paid, they couldn't race. So we said, well, we're not paying any fines. And we raced anyway, and almost all the teams followed our lead.
But Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Renault didn't participate.
A race without Ferrari was not a Grand Prix race.
Bernie, Max were trying, by all means, to try to break this front made by Ferrari, Alfa Romeo, Renault.
We then announced that we were starting a rival governing body, and we had a press conference in the hotel right next to the headquarters of the FIA in Paris. And everybody turned up, so people like Colin Chapman and Frank Williams, they're all there.
Vous croyez que très vite, il n'y aura qu'un seul championnat, ou le vôtre, ou celui de la FISA. Finalement, c'est un match de boxe.
J'espère pas comme ça. Ça, c'est rien. Et en même temps, soyons honnêtes, nous avons besoin au moins de Ferrari.
It was bluff, essentially, because in reality, we wouldn't have wanted our own series. We wanted Formula One.
Leur bluff va éclater comme des bulles de savon dans les jours qui viennent et que tout le monde va comprendre que la légalité est dans notre maison.
The World Federation of Motorsport present the World Professional Drivers' Championship.
Oh yes, that's it. That is the document we produce and send out. That's it. The sporting rules, all stolen from the FIA. The technical regulations, all stolen from the FIA. A background to the FOCA-FISA split, which was generous to describe it as tendentious, but anyway, it was our side of the story.
Agreement between the Formula One constructors. Oh, well, here we are. On behalf of MRD Limited, Bernie, Brabham, Frank Williams, Tyrrell, Ferrari. This is what triggered it all at the end of the day.
Enzo Ferrari changed sides because we were trying to improve the position of the teams, increase the money of the teams. That was in Ferrari's interest. He obviously really liked Bernie. He liked all of us because we were racers, which is fundamentally what he was.
He was sort of more or less an upmarket Eccleston. He was a used car dealer in better quality cars.
At one point, Ferrari said to Bernie, Eccleston, he always used to say, Eccleston, you should never talk about the money, talk about the sport. He said, if you're running a brothel, you don't put brothel in big letters, you put hotel, and the brothel is in the basement.
He probably thought I'd have been a customer.
Since Enzo Ferrari was now on our side, it was a difficult situation for Ballest.
We tried to put together a ceasefire and possibly a peace agreement. The reception was pretty cold.
Ballest went absolutely berserk. I mean, it was revolution. Enzo Ferrari finally called Ballest and said, don't be too quick to go against Bernie. After all, he produces the money. Ballest and FISA lost their nerve at that point.
Alors j'ai appelé M. Eccleston, ça a duré 5 minutes d'ailleurs. Nous avons établi un gentleman's agreement.
The deal was FIA's rules, FOCA was money. But he said it had to be called the Concord Agreement and be signed in Paris. But for us, that was no problem.
And they let Ballest think that he was doing stuff, but they essentially controlled everything.
Bernie had a goal of money.
I took all the financial risks, so it was never necessary to think we need control. It happens.
I don't think there's anyone that's put their own money into motorsport as much as I have.
For Bernie, money is power. And he liked the power.
Is that where he and Max see eye to eye? Power.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Ultimately, it was the biggest game in town, and I mean game because Max and Bernie played it as a game. Big game, big numbers, but they were just smart.
As far as I went myself, 1981, the Concord Agreement really was the end of it. I wanted out. Bernie and I used this place since the 80s, so a really long time. They're very good, they're very helpful.
They're in the service business.
Yes, exactly, and they sort of understand that, which so many people don't.
What did Bernie fly?
He's got a 7X, so that's a Dassault. He's had that a long time, but I can't justify anymore having one because I'd hardly ever fly, you know. So I've in a way sort of downgraded to this. But this, for flying around Europe, this is perfect.
What are we going to see?
Indian cars. We're going to see a standard crash test into an offset deformable barrier.
By the end of this month, we will have tested 30 Indian cars in total. But worst of all was the Tata Nano. The dummy actually improved the crash performance of the car. If it had been a human being, it would have been more mashed human.
Oh,
Imagine that in a typical street.
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
might have been happening. You know, if you're a bicyclist passing by.
The child doesn't seem to have done very well.
No.
Smell the gas from the airbag.
Yeah. We've now got a cluster of 4-star cars, and even more kind of put us on edge is that a couple of those are this close to 5-star. So we're right on the edge of something quite historic. It's almost too painful to contemplate where will this work, will this fail? It'd be very disappointing if we don't get the first 5-star car in India.
Sir Oswald Mosley, welcome to a special Today programme. You gave me the impression that you still believe the call might come for you. Do you really believe that?
I'm much better now than I've ever been in my life. I've still
Better
got
at what, sir?
Better at politics. And I hope more wisdom than I had when I was young. At least that seems to be the impression of a good many people. Therefore, while you have health and strength, you go on improving. Experience and wisdom.
I found out my father had died when I got a call from my brother, which wasn't entirely unexpected. Of course, it's always very sad. That's always very sad, but it's in the nature of things.
He's an important figure in your life, in every way.
Yeah, positive and negative, but I'd kind of separated myself, completely different life, my own life, unattached to his politics. But I'd lived in his shadow the whole time. It was watershed in the sense that I felt I could go into politics in England.
I suggested to Mrs. Thatcher once that she should put him in the cabinet. A bit difficult because he was on the other side, actually.
I remember saying to my father, when you were my age, you'd been a minister, you'd been in the First World War, he'd done an amazing amount by the time he was 30. And he was then on course to be eventually Prime Minister. He'd have been leader of the Labour Party and so on. And I felt sort of inadequate, because he really had, I mean, by the time he was 30, done it all. And the rest of his life was, for all practical purposes, wasted. Then I decided that I might spend 10 years looking for a seat. I'd be in my 50s, it'd be too late to do anything.
It's one of the few things that I believe he hasn't made a big enough effort. He always believed that it was because of his dad's position. That's the reason.
It probably wasn't the right place for me. It might have been, I don't know. You will never know. So then in 1985, I went back into motorsport. But this time I went back in a different way. I came back to run a FISA commission. Bernie was helpful to get the presidency of the commission because it would be useful for him to have an ally in the World Council. And then from that position, I became president of the FISA. And after that, it was a relatively short step to become president of the FIA.
Are you a stooge for Bernie Ecclestone sitting at the top end now as a president? Are you going to help him on his way? Or if he needs any help, that is.
I don't want to be sort of sound conceited, but if I'm a stooge, you know, he's done bloody well to get such a stooge.
He knew exactly what he wanted to achieve, and I would do anything I could do to make sure it happened, and he helped me.
There was quite a lot of complementary synergy between Max and Bernie. In effect, it became a cartel.
This was a very good time of Formula One because we are very efficient, and if the team and the federation decide something, happen next day.
Teams knew that they were going to get paid. They made ordinary people extraordinarily rich.
These two made Formula One what it is.
The cars were getting safer, and the drivers were becoming complacent. The conventional wisdom then was, well, we haven't had a fatality for, I think it was 12 years, and, you know, it's not dangerous anymore. And it was just obvious, a child could see, watching the cars, particularly in certain circuits, certain corners, it was very dangerous. But you couldn't really move anything.
I was responsible for all the technical rules. We hadn't had any serious accidents since Melio De Angelis was killed in Paul Ricard in '86. Bearing in mind, it was always a dreadful thing, but in the 70s it was almost common.
El problema mayor es la velocidad, que aumenta mucho todos los años. Los circuitos se mantienen los mismos.
But it may be that we will turn around and say, well, if you want to race at that speed, every now and then this is going to happen.
The whole weekend was a complete disaster. There was accidents from the morning until the evening.
I was there on the Friday when Barrichello had his accident, and it was a very serious accident. He swallowed his tongue. Sid hadn't been there quickly. It could have been very serious. And then on the Saturday, Ratzenberger got killed. That was like a big shock.
For the Grand Prix of San Marino.
And then on the Sunday, my wife was there with me when we were watching this at home on television, just sitting in my sitting room. There were two other life-threatening incidents. There was one with the mechanics in the pit lane, and then there was a crash on the start line where a piece of one of the cars went in the crowd and seriously injured a spectator.
Up into the grandstand.
It's gone into the grandstand.
And then we had Senna.
As you can see, the safety car is on course, leading the field past the site of the wreckage.
I remember it like it was yesterday. We're going into the top chicane, and Senna pulled alongside in the safety car, and his visor up, and he was going, "Come faster, faster."
Warm the tires up. These engines do not like running at these low speeds.
We're going, we can't go any faster. It's impossible.
We do have a green flag, and Ayrton Senna's away with Michael Schumacher.
And then, he had his accident.
He hit the wall and he got a head injury.
You could tell it was bad.
And somebody passed by and said, you know, the Deodon has a big problem. The hospital is fighting for the life.
I knew there'd be a phone call, and sure enough, somebody called and they explained that he was dead. And that was, again, it's really sad because I knew him and liked him, and I remember walking out into the garden sort of thinking about it. It's a lovely spring day. You know, you sort of think this is so bad, it's so unnecessary, it shouldn't happen. And you feel responsible. Suddenly, the whole world was talking about safety.
Every magazine, every newspaper was in front page, Formula One is finished, Formula One, blah, 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 blah. It was really hard.
Then, 2 weeks later, in Monaco, Carl Wendlinger had a serious accident coming out of the tunnel.
Wendlinger hit the barrier and was in coma for 2-3 weeks. You know, you have Imola, you have Monte Carlo, bam, bam.
At that point, panic set in. Some of the big manufacturers were saying, we want to pull out. The upside was that a whole lot of things that needed doing could be done very quickly, and nobody would really be politically in a position to stop us.
There is no need for fatalities in motorsport. The organising aim should be to eliminate the risk.
We used to get people saying, and politicians saying, our target is to reduce casualties by 50% over the next 10 years. And I'd say, no, you can't do that. That's like saying 50% of the number of people we're killing is okay. It isn't. You've got to say the target is 0.
One of the things that Max decided to do was to set up a new working group led by Sid Watkins.
And one of the things I said to Sid was, the governments must be doing a massive research on safety for road cars, because at that stage in the EU, which was then just 12 countries, they were killing 50,000 people a year. One knew that the governments must be doing something enormous, and surely we could benefit from this massive research. So Sid looked into it, came back and said they haven't done anything since 1974.
So he suddenly found 2 missions: fix the safety level in F1 and for road cars as well.
I always imagined while we were working away in the sport, someone in government somewhere was working on my behalf, and I have to confess I was astonished when I learned that they've allowed 20 years to go by and done nothing.
The problem was effectively the car industry had written the legislation.
It was quite obvious to me that there was an enormous amount could be done. And there's probably nobody else in the world in as good a position as the president of the FIA to have an effect on that. And I could see there was enormous potential which had never been touched. Almost exactly that time, David Ward came to work for us. He'd been the right-hand man of John Smith, the leader of the Labour Party back in 1994.
Max offered me this completely new position to set up an FIA office in Brussels.
David Ward knew Alan Donnelly very well, very significant player in the European Parliament, Secretary of the Economic Committee and the relations with the United States Congress, all sorts of things like that. Between us, we then started Euro NCAP in Brussels, where we bought the cars, crashed them in a laboratory, and published the results. The industry reacted with fury.
It was like, it was, you keep out of our business. We designed the car.
We would urge caution in understanding whether a car is safe or unsafe purely from these tests.
I mean, it was the same thing with other countries. Crash testing the Mexican version and the American version of the same car. The dummies in the American car walked away, and in the Mexican car, they're all dead. The message is very clear that that manufacturer thinks Mexicans don't matter, because there's nothing to stop him making the car to the same standard. They just don't bother. We had the advantage that we were independent, and what we were doing was actually truthful.
And in some of the most thoroughgoing tests carried out on cars anywhere in the world, they were particularly critical of the Rover 100.
The Mini Metro, the old Rover 100, was in the crash tests and did very badly. And within weeks, sales had just gone off a cliff.
The mini metro that my parents were driving at the time was taken off the road because it was a death trap.
The tests are worrying to us because they cover testing requirements in excess of anything that we have to design to, both now and in the future.
The industry resisted, but inevitably, one of them broke ranks.
The smart people knew that this was coming down the road, and so secretly, they were already testing their cars according to the new standard.
A few weeks later, Volvo did quite well, and they couldn't resist. They got a 4-star result.
A side impact protection system designed to dilute even the most severe impact.
All industry loyalty lasted, a nanosecond, and they all started stabbing each other in the back.
The first car that got 5 stars was a Renault. Of course, Renault used it as a big PR thing that day. So we went from where this legislation was going to bring the end of the European car industry because of the cost, to suddenly being a fantastic advertising tool for the manufacturers. Isn't it extraordinary that that hadn't dawned on them? I just find it extraordinary.
Between then and now, we've had 50% reduction in occupant fatalities.
Euro NCAP saved 78,000 lives just in the EU. Well, if you think that for every life saved, there's usually about 8 serious injuries. So that's 78,000 lives and about 600,000 serious injuries. That is massive. And when you think of the impact on a family, just one life, it's just devastating. Euro NCAP itself is a charity, and Formula One was the FIA's main source of money. So we persuaded Bernie to make a long-term commitment. It was $313.6 million. I mean, it was really important because that has enabled the FIA Foundation to spend $10, $15 million a year on road safety and motorsport safety.
Max had this vision of what needed to be done.
I wanted to start Global NCAP as a sort of umbrella organisation for NCAPs worldwide, but I was still president of the FIA. So in 2004, I actually resigned. I'd already got it in mind that my successor ought to be Jean Todt. I thought, he'd do a good job. He'd made Ferrari work, and he'd agreed to do it.
I said, look, I'm going to leave Ferrari. At the time, I felt I achieved most of what I wanted to achieve, so I gave my availability. Then Ferrari asked me to become CEO, and they made me a proposal which I felt was difficult to refuse. So I had a difficult task to call Max, and he was very annoyed about that, because he said, I don't want to stay.
We persuaded Max to reconsider his resignation and continue.
So I said, well, all right, I'll stay on for another 4 years. So I used the Formula One brand to promote global road safety.
We present to you this new safety campaign initiative in joint cooperation with the FIA Foundation.
The biggest killer worldwide for young people are road accidents. We're trying to mobilize opinion worldwide to do something about it.
Looking back, I probably stayed too long.
Max delayed, actually, in a way that he now regrets very much. Had he not, I think a lot of things might be different.
Because even though I wanted to focus on safety, I was inundated with one Formula One scandal after another. The most controversial thing, my entire presidency, probably was Indianapolis 2005. You had 3 teams on Bridgestone tyres, 7 teams on Michelin tyres, and during practice it became evident that the Michelin cars could not go round turn 13.
Michelin wanted us to put a chicane in to make the speed in the last corner slower so that their tyres would last.
It was stupid because Bridgestone tyres were fine, it was only Michelin.
We said we were not prepared to put a chicane in, and we offered them alternatives, all unpalatable of course, but it would have allowed them to compete.
There was a lot of theatre with people like Flavio visibly and publicly furious by what was going on.
What we ask is only what Michelin asked, a different configuration of the circuit and what's possible change.
So why did that not happen?
You need to talk with the Federation, I don't know why.
You know our plan is for the start. Straight in the pits, please, mate.
And so we had just 6 cars.
And what is the reaction of the crowd? Well, it's stunned.
I think it's an extremely sad day for Formula One.
We're all leaving. Tell Bernie Ecclestone we're out of here.
They had big signs up saying blame Mosley, which you would, but it was the right thing to do.
Max had got in his mind that he was going to cancel that race.
That was not funny at all. That was completely mad.
It's always the greatest crisis that's ever hit Formula One. And then 2 weeks later, you go somewhere else, and there's another great crisis.
And then there was a so-called Spygate. Chief mechanic at Ferrari got in touch with McLaren and supplied them with the complete intellectual property of Ferrari. So there were 700 pages of detailed technical data.
Today's evidence clearly demonstrated that we did not use any leaked information to gain a competitive advantage.
Ron, what's your feelings today? You feeling confident?
Actually, there were floating around some emails. And once we had the emails, we could summon them again, which we did.
Max told me once, he said, there was a moment when everything was clear. And that was the moment where we asked Ron to be honest, to apologize, to put the things on the table. But he didn't want to accept.
I genuinely think it's a pity that he didn't do what he should have done, is pick the phone up to Jean Todt and say, you've got a spy on your miss who's giving us stuff. And that would have just shut the whole thing down. And by now he'd have his knighthood and all the rest of it.
Max, I think, very seriously considered just kicking McLaren out of Formula One, full stop.
And I said, this will be throwing them out full time. There must be a better way. And that's why I proposed that they had a 100 million fine.
I got the blame for this, but it was Bernie who actually said it. That was 5 million for the offence and 95 million because Ron was a cunt.
It wasn't just a legal decision. I don't mean that it was personal, but we're not talking about a judge with a wig who's never seen the defendant before. They know each other. They go back 30 years.
Max was always one for a fight, never one to take a conciliatory approach.
Max didn't get through his career without making some enemies somewhere along the line.
But then, of course, I had another little problem, as I'm sure you've heard. It was a perfectly normal Sunday morning. I got a call from the FIA pressman, Richard Woods, saying, have you seen the News of the World? Well, I hadn't. I never saw the News of the World. I don't know anybody who did see the News of the World. And so I went and bought a couple of copies, and there it all was.
The head of communications for the FIA rang me on the Sunday morning and he said, you better get a copy of the News of the World.
Someone phoned me and said, have you seen the News of the World? I said, no, I never see the News of the World. And he said, I think you should.
I was in New York at a UN event with Jean Todt and Michel Yeoh. We were all rather astonished.
Front page and several pages inside. It was a huge story. And the main sort of thrust of it was that this was, I suppose they called it an orgy, I'd call it a party.
As soon as I saw the story, I was on the phone immediately. Have you seen it? It's unbelievable. Certainly he was stitched up like a kipper.
I looked through it and, your heart's in your mouth when you see this.
And they said it had a Nazi theme. Well, that was completely untrue.
Right from the beginning, I thought, this is just weird. Horrible moment, really.
I then showed the paper to my wife. Her immediate reaction was that I'd had it printed specially as a joke, because it's the sort of thing I would do. And so I had to explain, actually, it wasn't a joke.
And how did that conversation go, Max?
I think I've sort of managed to suppress it in my memory, but it wasn't a happy conversation.
Okay.
People do all sorts of odd things in the bedroom and say things, and in no way it's private.
It was an assault. They breached his privacy in the I mean, filming someone having sex in their own home and then finally to associate that with, you know, suggestions of Nazi orgies, I think was just, you know, it was just so wrong.
Here I am trying to do something useful and constructive. They're publishing a story which is of no interest, completely private. It's just them trying to sell a few newspapers.
It happened in a basement flat somewhere in this part of Chelsea in West London.
The next thing on the tape is the sound of a bottom being spanked.
If something is demonstrably true and it poses a threat to neither national security nor the personal safety of anybody involved, should newspapers be allowed to print it? And the answer is yes. And the problem is, if you don't want to see it printed, don't do it.
The editor of the News of the World said that the sick Nazi orgy description was justified.
Wasn't it tasteless fantasy, though? Isn't there an issue?
Completely tasteless, completely tasteless. But it was intended to be private, so any breach of taste, you'd have to blame the people that secretly filmed it.
You think that he will most likely not survive this?
I'm afraid he will most likely not survive it.
I call him. I go see, because when you see somebody attack him personally, you know, I mean, everybody has different taste, you know, you don't hurt anybody.
Flavio did everything he could to sort of cause trouble.
I think Max had a couple of very good allies in Jean Todt, who had given him his support from the very beginning, and Adam Parr, he was very supportive as well. But I think Flavio was probably in the other camp.
I think Flavio saw himself as somehow ascending to the throne.
Would you have liked to run Formula One?
No.
I was supposed to go to Bahrain, and then they sort of indicated they didn't want me to come.
I think if he had been working for any multinational corporation, public company, I fear he would have already had to resign.
What I remember most clearly was a meeting in which Flavio opened and said, Max has got to go. Bernie then said, why don't we all write a letter to Max and say, Max, you've done an amazing job for Formula One, thank you, now it's time to step down. And then I said to Bernie, write the letter, you sign it, get everyone else to sign it, and then send it to me and I'll think about it. And Bernie went absolutely ballistic and said, you're trying to do to me what I used to do to people when I was 14 years old.
Bernie Ecclestone refused to give an interview that would either criticise or even defend his old friend, instead just saying that Mosley's future is now entirely a matter for the FIA.
I was in a very difficult position because nearly all the sponsors said to me, actually made an effort to get to me to say, you've got to get Max out of the FIA. We can't have him.
There were definitely personal scores being settled. I don't think anyone in Formula One would take the moral high ground on that. Was this an opportunity to change the dynamics of Formula One?
Monaco was quite funny because the CVC people went round, want to go around the paddock trying to get the teams to sign a thing saying that I ought to resign.
Max was Max. He was extremely calm. It was his first time back in the paddock, I think. There was Flavio saying, this is our opportunity, Bernie, to run this sport together without Max. And then there was the people saying it's bad for the governance of the sport and sponsors, whatever. And then there was the people with a grudge. And I know from personal experience that they were on the phone all the time.
I was completely unaware of it. Now, partly that is, I think, because people don't go out of their way to be offensive. But also, I do have this tendency to walk around in a bubble.
I think he was hurt that he didn't get the fulsome support that he would have expected from Bernie. But you know, because they were so close, people always assumed that they were joined at the hip. And this was the one moment where there was, you could see daylight between them. I think people just assumed he would disappear off, but that's not the nature of Max Mosley. If you cross him, he will fight ferociously.
Everybody was saying I should resign. Somebody's sex life is private, and if a newspaper are low enough to publicise it, that should not affect what they do.
If it had remained private, it would be a private matter, but it is not a private matter any longer.
It had no effect on my job, so I called the General Assembly. Several people, Bernie, for example, advised me against. He said, it's terrible, you'll lose the vote, it'll be so humiliating. But nothing compared to being world champion boxer. I mean, you get in that ring, and there's half a chance you're going to get knocked out, and I really admire those people. You've just got to face the fact that you can lose, but that's not an argument for not fighting.
Max Mosley, the head of World Motorsport's governing body, the FIA, has survived a vote of confidence in his leadership at a meeting in Paris this morning.
And of course, in fact, I won it 2-1. And the people who voted against were all sort of people who didn't want me there anyway.
I don't even think Bernie was at the meeting.
First phone call I had, I think Bernie rang me. He didn't think I was going to win. He said, well done. We couldn't say anything else, could he? He couldn't say, I'm super pissed off. Thought we got rid of you or something.
It's a very interesting question why Bernie didn't support Max at that critical moment. Bernie chose not to, and I think he sorely regretted that decision.
I went to an FIA meeting and sort of apologised for actually having supported the fact that he should resign. I should have been behind him, supporting him. Out of all the things I've done in my life, that's probably the one thing that I'm ashamed of.
I don't really want to get sort of stuck into Bernie about it, because it's all history, you know. The news of the world, however, is a different matter. My first thought, I think, when I first opened the paper and looked at it, I thought, this is war. I'm going to go after these people, and nobody is entitled to do that to anybody else. Certainly not to me.
You know, there's a famous story about someone saying to Bernie, do you think Max knows what he's taken on with Rupert Murdoch? And Bernie said, I'm just wondering whether Rupert Murdoch knows what he's taken on with Max.
Rupert Murdoch owns a big chunk of the British press. In particular, he owns the News of the World, the Sun, the Times, and the Sunday Times. So I said, I don't care if I have to pay all the costs, I'm going to get them in the witness box and demonstrate that they're liars.
Trial begins today. News Group will argue their story is in the public interest.
So they had to invent a public interest. So what did they do? They said, oh, it's Nazi. To film somebody doing sexual activities in private, it's illegal to publish it, unless there's a public interest. The reason they said it had a Nazi theme was German was spoken.
Max Mosley looked on intently as the court was played an audio recording from a sex party he attended in early March.
4 of the ladies turned up and gave evidence at the trial, and their testimony immediately destroyed the Nazi accusation.
The head of World Motorsport, Max Mosley, has won his privacy court action in London against a British newspaper.
Right, well, I'd like to say that I'm delighted with that judgment, which is devastating for the news of the world. It also shows that they had no right to go into private premises and take pictures and films of adults engaged in activities which are no one's business but those of the people concerned. The woman who did the film was put up to it by her husband who worked for MI5, and I think he just did it to get some money.
I would never have said that it was a Nazi.
And what would you say to Max Mosley if you could speak to him now?
Just get on my knees and apologise, to be honest.
I didn't have any reaction to what she said, other than to think, well, why the hell did she do it? You know, I mean, it was so stupid and unnecessary and pointless and damaging to her and everybody else. I mean, I got £60,000. Up till then, I think the biggest award had been £3,000 for breach of privacy. It wasn't exactly a good deal.
Who was behind it? Honestly, I have no idea.
Well, the only connection I've ever imagined there might be is that after Spygate, a correspondent wrote an article in the Sunday Times in which Max was accused of a witch hunt against McLaren, and Max sued for libel. And it just so happens that the Sunday Times and the News of the World were in the same Murdoch stable.
It wasn't just the News of the World, you know, deciding to do that. There were people who wanted to damage Max's reputation from the One World who got the ball rolling.
There were 3 suspects in Formula One. And then there's the possibility that it was literally just the MI5 man and his wife sort of thinking, this is a quick few bob. Whoever it was, it had a profoundly negative effect on me and, of course, my family. The effect on my wife and my children was far worse than on me. And, of course, they were absolutely not to blame. Alexander was a depressive, and like a lot of depressives, the drugs didn't work. I mean, it's the most awful problem. I got a call from Patrick. You know, and I mean, and of course your first reaction in a situation like that is, it's not true, that somebody's made a mistake. There's nothing worse than losing a child. When it's your father that you sort of, one hopes, sort of like to look up to and so on, it's so undignified. So it was really bad. I think it had a big effect on him. Whether it tipped the balance, I don't know. Probably of the things that can happen to you, it's the worst. And Jean, she'll never get over it. I don't ever get over it, but you can't undo it.
Max is very good at hiding his feelings. It's the one occasion which Max's defense slips. You can see, you know, this goes deep.
I just think it was the most horrific summer. He did leave the FIA in the end in 2009, and he left more or less on his own terms.
It's all challenge and response. I tend to be my most vulnerable when there's nothing particular going on.
A lot of other people would have just wanted to sort of disappear and hide, but he did the exact opposite.
After I won my case against News International, I decided not to leave it there. There plainly needed to be a change in the law.
Max is an ex-barrister and brilliant at sort of thinking tactically outside the box and fearless. You know, completely fearless, ready to take on the biggest monsters. I'm very glad he's my friend, not my enemy.
I don't actually like fighting the big guys because there's a serious danger of losing when you do that. But sometimes you've got to do it. I've done nothing except concentrate on various aspects of bringing out into the public domain the full truth. It turned out that the News of the World had been systematically breaking the law to get stories.
It was hardcore, the open theft of people's medical records, trackers on people's cars, hacked phones. They were completely out of control. Then, July 2011, the whole Millie Dowler scandal blew up here. The News of the World had hacked the phone of a teenager who'd been abducted and was subsequently murdered. And the public was revolted by that.
Today, the whole family walked behind her coffin, past the spot where the teenager vanished on her way home from the station.
The News of the World had been behind the deletion of Millie Dowler's voicemails.
This is the latest twist in the long-running phone hacking scandal
an ever-growing number of people whose messages were allegedly accessed by the Sunday tabloid's private investigator, Glenn Mulcaire.
As soon as I saw that, I realised this changes the whole game. And of course then, it was like an avalanche.
We discovered that in fact, New Scotland Yard had significant amounts of information that had not been disclosed.
During the 2007 inquiry, police officers found evidence that staff from the News of the World were using private investigators to hack into thousands of mobile phones.
They operated in an atmosphere of total impunity because the politicians were too scared to take them on, because the press had the power to make or break a politician's career, a prime minister's career.
Rupert Murdoch had the British government and the police really under control. The only people he didn't control were the judiciary. And without them, he'd still be doing what he was doing.
Media mogul Rupert Murdoch is in Idaho this week. Do you walk this fast all the time? I know when I'm running away from you guys.
And they knew they were working for a criminal organisation that destroyed people's lives. One of the senior editors actually is on record as saying, that's what we do. We go out and ruin people's lives. Well, how should an organisation like that be allowed to continue? Apart from the News of the World, it seemed to me completely clear. The Sun had been at it, the Mail was at it, the Mirror had been at it. And of course, they all denied it, they all lied in their teeth.
Rebecca Brooks and News International chairman James Murdoch refused to answer questions as they left their meeting.
This led to a prosecution and a massive government inquiry into tabloid culture. Mr. Dacre said that I was guilty of unimaginable depravity, but it reflects very badly on his imagination. But apart from that, the world has moved on. The only person who hasn't moved on is Mr. Dacre.
And funnily enough, I read in the Independent this morning that apparently I do the same thing. I trade on my good name, and therefore there's a public interest defence in going into my private life, but I wasn't aware I traded on my good name. I mean, I've never had a good name, and it's made absolutely no difference at all. I'm the man who was arrested with a prostitute, and the film still made tons of money.
Horribly, I accused my friends and family of selling stories, and they accused each other as well.
We now know your phones were being hacked.
Yes. With my publicist, we had a separate number that we would only speak to each other on that number. And subsequently, I found out that Glenn Mulcaire had that number as well. So just every area of my life was under constant surveillance.
It was an inquiry, not a trial. But Leveson won, ended with the judge making some recommendations that were actually extremely mild.
I think probably the best moment, and it sounds awful this in a way, but the best moment was when there was this television picture of that Myler, who'd been editor when they did the story about me, leading his staff out of the News of the World for the last time.
This is not where we wanted to be, and it's not where we deserve to be.
There would probably be some decent people working with the News of the World, but not many.
I think most people who've seen what Max has done, particularly on the phone hacking campaign, which is seen as trying to promote fairness and transparency and decency.
Have you ever been recognised for your work?
I've got Legion d'Honneur, I've got the Grande Officiale, I've got a thing from the German car industry for road safety. It goes on and on and on. This is an extraordinary surprise because my book is only partly a sports book, so I feel I'm slightly here under false pretense. When I had a time when people were being nice about me, it never really felt quite real because from childhood on, I've always found myself, whether it was my fault or not, the subject of criticism, even if it was only because of my parents and so on. So it never felt quite right. I sometimes put my Legion d'Honneur on, but the only point of them is they annoy your enemies.
Max has an excellent engine, tending his brain, his intelligence, has an excellent, the most powerful acceleration. Some problem with the brakes.
Max Mosley is now using data protection laws to try to limit what the press can say about people's past, including his own.
The press do not want ordinary people who can't afford to bring an action against the press, don't want them to have access to justice. I can understand that, but I don't sympathise. I want the Crime and Courts Act to come into force, which would mean somebody who's got no money could still challenge them if they write something inaccurate. I knew I had some unfinished business with the press, but I also knew I had to deal with some very difficult and unscrupulous people.
This is a scandal of our time, that their noble lordships should have put into law a piece of legislation that has been pushed, harried through by perhaps one of the most disreputable figures in British public life. I refer, of course, to Mr. Max Mosley.
The political world takes itself a bit too seriously, I think. Max doesn't take himself too seriously.
Does the panel think it's fair that the super rich and privileged can buy protection for their reputations when they stray like randy tomcats?
Max Mosley.
Oh dear. I thought that was going to be me. People sometimes have a go at me because they think I'm rich. But I mean, it's completely unjustified because insofar as I've got a little bit of money and time, I have been using that for many years to try and defend the interests of people who don't. Former F1 boss begins legal bid to limit free speech. Well, that's very arguable. The extraordinary thing is the headline is in self-defense, and then it says, privacy campaigners have no business undermining press freedom and the rule of law, however deep their pockets. Well, how can you be said to be undermining the rule of law if you're just telling them, if you don't agree with me, we'll go to the High Court, and a judge will decide. There we go. Mosley legal bid to scrub his orgy from history. I mean, it's just shit paper, isn't it? It's rubbish, isn't it? The Daily Mail, their editor, Dacre, he was one of the leading lights against any proper press regulation.
The growing clamour for more regulation ignores the uncomfortable truth that the press is already on the very cusp of being over-regulated.
The thing that really infuriated him was that I went and provided the funding for a recognised press regulator. Then I became public enemy number one. The Daily Mail decided to have a sort of massive go at me. It was the front page and 10 more pages inside, so 11 pages altogether, all about what happened in 1961. I think behind this is poor Dacre, the man who edits the Daily Mail, who, the thing is, I was quite rude about him in my book. Really, the only people that think they can go into the bedroom of consenting adults and tell them what they should or should not do are the Taliban and Mr. Dacre. He's the Kensington Taliban, actually. If I found out that all he ever does is turn the light out and draw the curtains and assume the missionary position, well, that's his business. It's not up to me. And the result is this sort of thing. And then they went on for several more days because the gutter press were intent on destroying me and all the work we'd done.
Leveson 1 was about what is the appropriate way to regulate the media. Leveson 2 is to look at what was essentially criminal behaviour. The Conservatives, clearly under a lot of pressure from their closest friends in the media, were strongly against it. But it was a pledge nevertheless. I mean, it's quite striking how you have a question in the House of Commons for Theresa May to answer all about this.
Does she share my concerns about the links Max Mosley has with Impress and the links Max Mosley has with some of our leading politicians?
The free press is very important. It underpins our democracy.
The fact that you have, within a 48-hour period, a huge hit on one of the main campaigners for Leveson 2, and then literally the next day the government is reneging on its commitment to set up Leveson 2. That is just too much of a coincidence.
Leveson 2 was successfully shut down.
Completely. It was successfully shut down, so there has to be a reaction, and the reaction is the courts.
Yeah, we have to do it another way. The job's not done.
If they think they've got away with it, they're wrong.
The country needs releasing from this octopus grip of a few tax-shy, non-resident billionaires.
The Daily Mail has been hugely influential, especially with the Conservative Party. It's all very ironic, because in the 1930s, the Daily Mail was a strong supporter of fascism, Mussolini, and Oswald Mosley. The legacy of Max being his father's son keeps coming back to haunt him.
Max,
I'm Doug Sabat from The Guardian.
Listen, this isn't a trap.
Who are these people?
They're doing a film about road safety. It's not sinister at all.
Road safety, marvellous.
Yeah, sorry.
Right.
That's what I do most of my time on, but this is a distraction.
Well, I can see that, yes.
Come on in. Then.
Yes, great. Are you glad to be back in the news?
No, I mean, because if we could get the same sort of publicity for the road safety thing. I mean, for example, I was in India. 400 people a day die there on the roads. All this business about what happened 55 or 60 years ago, I have to say I find mind-numbingly tedious, but I suppose I would say that.
Can you ever escape from your father?
No. I mean, the thing is that, I mean, it's a pity in a way, because I think if I'd come from an ordinary family, or normal family, I might have done quite a lot in politics or something like that.
Yes.
I was very much under his influence. I've obviously known him since early childhood.
Yes.
And he was a very convincing, charismatic person, as I think is well known. And I was convinced by what he said to me.
Try to lean a bit forward. Looking into Max's eyes, there's a very deep and misunderstood man who had an exceptionally complex childhood.
Did your parents ever tell you that they loved you?
I think my mother did. My mother was, my mother was very sort of affectionate to us all. It wasn't really my father's scene.
Not on anchor.
Press. Fact check is an unknown process to the British tabloids. And insofar as it gave me any credit, they wouldn't publish anything to do with NCAP. Because, I mean, the hatred is incredible. But on the other hand, they can publish NCAP results without mentioning me.
It's all building up to this thing. There's a race between three manufacturers to who can have the first 5-star car.
This vehicle, the Tata Nexon, we believe that this will be the first 5-star car in India. It's a very historic milestone. So,
should we go and have a look?
Yeah, brilliant. I just hope to Christ it is a pass, because if it's a fail, we've got a problem.
Kind of.
Doors are locked.
Huh?
The doors are locked.
Oh, that may be a small technical issue.
The person really who's made global NCAP happen is David Ward. He's one of those people who never stops thinking about it.
So the Tata Nexon performed extremely well in the crash test. Look at the top line of the door here. There's absolutely no change at all. The airbag has gone off extremely well. There's a kind of smiley face image on the airbag, which is the paint from the dummy's face landing exactly in the center of the airbag as we wanted. The occupant compartment has not collapsed. So basically the occupant shell has performed exactly as required. So we're really delighted that we now have India's first 5-star car. The first 5-star car entirely designed and engineered in India. So it's a Make in India achievement.
It's an example for other countries. They can't pretend it's
something insignificant. It's massive. How many lives have been saved? Thousands of lives in Europe. That's going to be replicated here, but on a bigger scale, because the population of India is more than twice the EU. And all those people will be healthy and safe, who would otherwise have been killed. I like to think that maybe between us we've saved more lives than some of our more hopeless politicians have cost.
What is the Mosley family legacy now?
I'm afraid as long as the legacy can be spelt out by the gutter press, the Sun and the Mail, it'll always be the one they want. But, I mean, in the end, you know what you've done. As far as the news of the world's concerned, there's the whole big story. There are 3 suspects in Formula One.
Who are those suspects?
Oh, no, I can't say. I wouldn't want to alert them. At least 2 of them have got no idea that they're suspects.
You said eventually you'll find out. Are you looking?
Gently, quietly. I've sort of got my antennae out.
And if you do find out who it was?
I think... Yeah, I mean, they would have problems, but nothing, they'd need some lawyers.